It was April 21, 2006. A warm Friday evening had settled over the quiet town of Rockford, Missouri. The kind of evening where kids rode their bikes without helmets, sprinklers danced on front lawns, and golden light spilled lazily across the sidewalks. Everything felt safe, familiar, predictable. Madeline Cho had just finished her online class and stretched her legs at the doorway of her family's modest two-story home. She was 25, a recent graduate from Southeast Missouri State, majoring in sports management. But more than that, she was the pride of the Cho family, the first to go to college, a black belt in Taekwondo, and the kind of daughter who still helped her mom fold laundry on Sundays. She tied her sneakers tightly, double-knotted like always. "Let's go, Lily," she smiled, handing a bottle of water to her 19-year-old sister. The two jogged together every Friday evening, a tradition that began when their father passed away unexpectedly years earlier. Running had become their way of staying close, of breathing through the grief, one step at a time. That night, they took their usual route, down Harlan Avenue, past the Korean grocery, and toward Fairgrove Park, a long stretch of green tucked behind a row of abandoned warehouses. It wasn't the most scenic path, but it was quiet, away from traffic, and gave them room to breathe. Madeline was always faster. Not just in running, but in life. She was the kind of person who set alarms even on weekends, the type who volunteered for things no one else would. As usual, after the first half-mile, she was already 10 strides ahead of Lily. "I'll loop back after the bridge," she called out, her voice light, barely winded. Lily nodded, watching her sister's silhouette disappear between the trees. The shadows stretched longer as the sun dipped lower, and the crickets began their nightly chorus. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Lily kept running, expecting at any moment to see Madeline waving from the path up ahead. But she never did. She reached the bridge. Nothing. She doubled back, her pace quickening. A tight feeling settled in her chest. Maybe Madeline had taken a different route. Maybe she'd gone home first. Lily turned and ran faster than she ever had before. But when she burst through the front door, their mother looked up from the kitchen in confusion. "Where's your sister?" "She's not here." That single question, so casual in its phrasing, marked the moment everything broke. Lily froze. Her hands trembled as she realized something was wrong, deeply wrong. She turned and sprinted back toward the park, her breath ragged, a scream building in her chest. Halfway down the gravel trail, she saw it. A shoe. Madeline's left sneaker, white with blue stripes, the one she wore every run, lying on its side near the edge of the path. Next to it, something darker. She knelt closer. Blood. A wide smear of it, soaked into the dirt and dry grass. Lily's body went cold. She looked around frantically, trees, silence, not a soul in sight. She bolted to the nearest park security outpost. The man inside barely looked up from his radio. "There's blood. And a shoe." "My sister's missing," she said, breathless. He shrugged. "Could be from earlier. We had a bike accident this morning. Probably nothing. Can you check? Please?" She was just there. He waved her off with a sigh, muttering something about being understaffed. Lily ran back home, her lungs burning, tears now falling freely. She burst through the front door again, screaming for her mother. Within minutes, the Cho family was on the phone with 911, their voices shaky, words tripping over each other in desperation. The Rockford Police Department responded quickly, to their credit. By 7 p.m., a search team had been assembled. 40 officers. Dogs. Flashlights. Friends and neighbors joined, combing the park, the woods, the trails behind the golf course. Grid by grid. Hour by hour. The town's sense of safety unraveled in real time. By midnight, whispers had turned to prayers. By 2 a.m., those prayers turned to dread. Then came the call. A fisherman, out near Old Valley Creek, 2 miles from the park, had seen something in the bushes just off the path. Something that looked like a body. Detectives raced to the scene. The girl was lying half-covered in tall weeds, the lower half of her body exposed, shirt pushed to her chest. Bruises across her ribs. Cuts along her arms. Her face, unrecognizable at first glance. A deep gash sliced clean across her neck. The medical examiner would later count 52 injuries. When Mrs. Cho arrived to identify the body, she hesitated. She wasn't wearing red, she whispered. Madeline wore a blue shirt when she left. The examiner paused. The shirt's red from the blood, he said gently. That night, a family's world collapsed. A quiet town lost its innocence. And somewhere in the darkness, a killer walked free, unseen, unknown. Who would do this to Madeline Cho? She wasn't a girl with enemies. She wasn't involved in dangerous things. She was the girl who held doors for strangers, who tutored younger students, who laughed too loudly at her own jokes. She had dreams of becoming a coach, of opening a community fitness center, of making her mother proud. Instead, she became a statistic. But Madeline Cho was not a statistic. She was a sister, a daughter, a friend. And someone, somewhere, was going to pay for what they did to her. The search for truth had only just begun. Before the headlines, before the blood and the body, before her name became a hashtag, there was just Madeline. To anyone outside of Rockford, Missouri, she might have seemed ordinary. Just another young woman from a working-class neighborhood in the Midwest. But to those who knew her, to her family, her friends, her professors, Madeline Cho was anything but ordinary. She was a flame in a quiet room. The kind of person you noticed not because she demanded attention, but because she radiated something warm, something steady. She had presence, the unshakable kind. Born in 1981 to Korean immigrants who worked double shifts at a laundromat they later bought, Madeline was the third of 5 children, sandwiched right in the middle. And yet, somehow, she always made space for others, especially her younger siblings. Her mother used to say, she was born with an old soul. And maybe that was true. By age 10, she was cooking dinner for her brothers. By 13, tutoring Lily in algebra. By 16, earning her black belt in Taekwondo while working weekends at a local diner. Discipline wasn't something she chased, it was something she lived. She wasn't the smartest in her class, but she was the most relentless. She didn't get into college on scholarship. She got in because she refused to quit. Southeast Missouri State wasn't an Ivy League school. But when Madeline walked across that graduation stage in 2005, in a second-hand cap and gown, she made history in the Cho family. She was the first to hold a degree, the first to speak at a public forum, the first to say out loud, "I'm going to build something." She wanted to create a nonprofit for underprivileged kids, combining sports and leadership training. Physical discipline builds emotional strength, she once said in a presentation. Her dream was to open a community center in Rockford, the kind she never had growing up. But beyond the ambition, Madeline had heart. Her friends called her Coach Cho, not just because she helped them train, but because she made everyone feel capable. Her roommate from college remembered how Madeline left notes taped to mirrors. "You've got this. Show the world who you are today." She was light in human form. Her boyfriend, Dylan Reyes, met her in sophomore year during an intramural basketball tournament. She blocked his shot, laughed, and helped him up. That was how it started. They were opposites in many ways. He was impulsive, sarcastic, loud. She was measured, sincere, quietly funny. But together, they worked. No drama. No toxicity. Just 2 young people building dreams side by side. 3 years strong. They talked about moving to St. Louis, maybe even getting engaged after Madeline landed her first post-grad job. Dylan called her, "my compass." She was the calm he didn't know he needed. After her death, he wouldn't speak publicly for months. Because how do you talk about a future that someone ripped away with a knife? Madeline's mother, Mrs. Young Cho, never liked attention. But after losing her daughter, she became the voice for every mother who had buried hope. "I didn't raise a fighter so she would die alone in the dirt," she told reporters once. "I raised a fighter so she could protect others. And someone took that away." Rockford wasn't a place where things like this happened. People left their doors unlocked. Teenagers played basketball under the street lamps until midnight. There were bake sales, block parties, and church picnics. Violence wasn't part of the landscape. And yet, somehow, evil found its way into that quiet park. That's what tore the town apart. Not just the murder, but the incomprehensibility of it. Why Madeline? She had no enemies. She wasn't involved in anything dangerous. She didn't live recklessly or provoke. If anything, she was the girl who carried pepper spray on her keychain and took self-defense classes. The one who made sure her friends texted when they got home safe. The one who would have fought back if she'd had the chance. And that's what haunted everyone. The idea that someone could overpower her. That someone could plan something like this. Or worse, that it was random. That she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rumors spread fast. People speculated, was it someone she knew? Was it revenge? Was it racial? For months, the questions circled like vultures over a town in mourning. The funeral was held at Harmony Baptist Church, where Madeline once taught Sunday school. It was standing room only. Her old taekwondo teammates wore their GIs with black bands on their sleeves. Her college friends traveled across states. Dylan sat in the front pew, clutching the program like it was the last thing tethering him to her. On the casket, her mother placed Madeline's graduation cap. She never got to wear it twice, she whispered. In the weeks that followed, her room was left untouched. A curling iron still plugged in. A grocery list taped to the fridge. Her phone, fully charged, sat on her nightstand, never to ring again. Lily Cho, her younger sister, stopped speaking for nearly 2 weeks. Her therapist would later call it trauma silence. But when she did speak again, her voice was clear. I saw the car. A black SUV. Tinted windows. No plates visible. It sped past the park the same moment Madeline disappeared from view. It was a small detail. But it would later become everything. Because someone, somewhere, had done this. And whether it took weeks, months, or years, the Cho family would not stop until they found him. Until they could look him in the eye and say, you may have taken her life, but you will not take her truth. The first hour didn't feel like an emergency. When Madeline didn't come home right away, her mother figured she'd stop to talk with a neighbor or ran an extra lap. She always pushed herself a little harder, even during casual runs. But when Lily came home alone, pale and shaking, her voice barely audible, Mrs. Cho's heart sank. The look in her daughter's eyes said it all. She's not there, Lily whispered. That sentence, simple as it was, opened a pit in her chest. They didn't wait. Within 5 minutes, they had called 911. While the dispatcher calmly took down the details, Mrs. Cho stood motionless in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. By the time the police arrived at 6:45 p.m., the sun was beginning to set. Shadows stretched long across the quiet streets. Officers took statements from both Lily and Mrs. Cho while others headed to Fairgrove Park with flashlights and radios. At first, the tone was procedural, missing person, early hours, standard questions. What was she wearing? Was she known to wander off? Had she been depressed? No, Mrs. Cho answered firmly. She wouldn't disappear. Not without telling us. Something's wrong. Lily led an officer back to the trail. They stopped at the spot where she'd found the shoe. It was still there. One white sneaker with blue stripes, half sunk in dry dirt. Nearby, a dark stain on the gravel that hadn't been there earlier. The officer radioed for backup. Within the hour, Rockford police had declared Madeline Cho officially missing. By 8 p.m., a search and rescue team of 40 officers was assembled. Volunteers arrived. Friends from school. Neighbors who knew the Cho family from church. Coaches. Former classmates. Even people who'd never met Madeline showed up. They brought flashlights, maps, homemade flyers. One woman brought her search dog. Another showed up with bottled water and granola bars, saying quietly, "For the helpers." They fanned out across the neighborhood in teams of 4. The woods. The overgrown trail that led behind the old golf course. The abandoned warehouse where local teens sometimes drank on weekends. They searched ditches and dumpsters, culverts and parking lots. They called her name over and over, like somehow she'd hear them and answer back. But there was only silence. Back at the Cho house, Mrs. Cho and Lily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the door. Every minute that passed felt like 100. By midnight, fatigue had set in. But no one stopped. Even as the night air grew colder and the flashlights dimmed, the search continued. The local news station aired a late-breaking segment. Photos of Madeline flashed across the screen. Her taekwondo uniform, her graduation cap, a candid shot of her smiling with Dylan on campus. That image, frozen in happiness, contrasted painfully with the reality unfolding. Then, at 2:30 a.m., everything changed. A 911 call came in from a fisherman who had been checking his lines near Old Valley Creek, a spot just a couple of miles from the park. He had seen something in the bushes. At first he thought it was trash, maybe a pile of clothes or a dumped mattress. But as he got closer, his flashlight caught something pale. A body. Officers arrived in minutes. What they found stopped them cold. A young woman, face down in the brush, shirt pushed up, no pants, bruises, cuts, dried blood. Her skin was mottled, her hair tangled in dirt and grass. Her left wrist bent unnaturally. A deep slash at her throat, nearly severing her windpipe. She wasn't breathing. Paramedics confirmed what they already feared. Dead on scene. No ID. No phone. But one of the officers recognized the face from the flyer in his jacket pocket. Madeline Cho. The ME's report later documented 52 injuries. Contusions across her torso. Defensive wounds on her hands. Head trauma. Signs of sexual assault. And a knife wound across her neck that had likely been the fatal blow. When officers knocked on the Cho family's door just after 3:30 a.m., Mrs. Cho didn't need to hear the words. The look on the detective's face said everything. She collapsed before they even finished the sentence. Lily didn't scream. She just stood there, shaking, her mouth open in disbelief, like her brain couldn't connect the words to the reality. She was strong, she said quietly. She could fight. She would have fought. The days that followed blurred together. Grief doesn't hit like a wave. It hits like a brick wall, fast and final. Then it stays like a shadow. There was no guidebook. No rule for how to bury a 25-year-old. No words to say at a funeral when everyone in the room had expected to see her building a life, not lying in a coffin. The local police commissioner held a press conference that week. "We will not rest," he said. "We owe this family answers. We owe Madeline justice." But answers wouldn't come easy. Not in a town that hadn't seen a murder in 7 years. Not when the killer left almost no evidence. Not when the victim was found alone in a place no one should have been at that hour. The autopsy confirmed what everyone feared. Madeline had been assaulted, beaten, then killed, all likely within a few hours of her disappearance. But who did it? And how could they still be out there? Lily remembered the SUV. But no plates. Tinted windows. It had passed her fast, too fast, just as she lost sight of her sister on the trail. That detail stuck with her. Detectives filed it as a lead. But the black SUV in Missouri wasn't exactly rare. They canvassed the area. Checked security footage from gas stations and convenience stores. Nothing. Either the vehicle was never captured on camera, or someone had made sure of that. As the investigation stalled, rumors took root. People whispered at churches, at grocery stores, in staff lounges. Some said it was a drifter. Others suggested someone Madeline knew. A few pointed fingers at the immigrant community, sparking ugly undertones of racism that disgusted the Chos. The truth was, no one knew. And that was the most terrifying part. A girl like Madeline, good, kind, strong, could vanish from a park in broad daylight and end up dead in a ditch, and no one saw anything? In Rockford, Missouri, that was unthinkable. But it had happened. Now the question was, would the system have the strength to find the person responsible? Or would Madeline Cho become another cold case? By the time the sun rose the next morning, the town of Rockford was no longer the same. What had once been a quiet community, where kids biked home from school and neighbors waved from porches, was now a place of hushed voices, closed blinds, and fear. A young woman had been abducted, assaulted, and killed in the span of hours, in a public park, no less. And no one had seen a thing. The police, initially swift in response, began to show signs of strain as days passed without progress. The media picked up the story. Regional stations. Then state-level outlets. Tragedy in Rockford, the headlines read. A promising life cut short. Detectives worked long shifts. They interviewed over 100 people in the first 10 days. Residents near the park, joggers, dog walkers, local teens known to hang around the Fairgrove Trail. No one had seen anything helpful. They brought in cadaver dogs to retrace the route. They tested soil samples. They collected DNA from everyone who had even a remote connection to the area. They found nothing. The Cho family, though devastated, became a driving force in the case. Madeline's older brother, Daniel, flew in from California and began coordinating with law enforcement. He posted daily updates on a Facebook page titled Justice for Madeline. Lily, her voice steadier now, gave interviews, recounting the black SUV, the shoe, the exact moment she knew her sister wasn't coming back. "We're not going to let her story be forgotten," she told a local news anchor. "And we're not going to let the person who did this get away." But beneath the surface, the cracks in the case widened. A week after the discovery of Madeline's body, police turned their attention to the old Fairgrove Golf Club, a now-defunct property sitting abandoned less than a mile from the crime scene. Overgrown. Boarded windows. A hotspot for squatters and illicit activity. They brought in forensic teams. During a sweep of the parking lot, a sharp-eyed officer noticed something odd. A small, older model white truck, half concealed behind a maintenance shed. The truck wasn't on any registry for the area. Its doors were unlocked. Inside, an old fast food wrapper, an empty water bottle, and, most importantly, traces of blood and what appeared to be seminal fluid on the back seat. It was the first real lead. The truck was impounded. DNA samples were collected. It was big news. For a brief moment, there was hope. Police detained 6 individuals who had been working odd jobs on the golf property, groundskeepers, night security, and a few undocumented workers from nearby towns. All men. All aged 20 to 40. One had a minor assault record. Another had a DUI. But when the DNA results came back, hope evaporated. None matched the sample found on Madeline's body. One by one, the men were released. So were the headlines. The backlash was immediate. Some accused the police of scapegoating vulnerable individuals. Others, more sinister voices, whispered, maybe it was one of their own. The Cho family didn't lash out. They waited. They trusted. But with each passing week, their trust frayed. 2 more months went by. Then 3. Police brought in 12 additional individuals, mostly foreign-born workers who had previously been overlooked. Same questions. Same process. Same outcome. No matches. No arrests. No answers. The department assigned a new lead detective, a former FBI liaison named Detective Caroline Briggs, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and obsession with details. Briggs requested to re-examine the entire case file from scratch. She started with the crime scene photos. Then the vehicle reports. Then the civilian tips, every last one. That's when she noticed something. Among the early statements was Lily Cho's description of the black SUV. It had tinted windows and a distinctive, faded rearview mirror on the passenger side. Lily said she saw it speed by as she lost sight of Madeline. In the initial report, the vehicle was logged, but no one had followed up on matching it to known residents or vehicles registered nearby. Briggs did. It took her 2 weeks and several DMV cross-checks, but eventually, she found a vehicle registered to a Kevin Mallory, a 28-year-old who lived just 4 blocks from the Cho family. The SUV matched the description: black, tinted windows, damaged side mirror. Mallory had no criminal record. He was employed at a local car dealership. But one detail made the hairs on Briggs's neck stand up. Mallory's father was Graham Mallory, owner of Mallory & Sons, the largest real estate firm in the county and a man with deep ties to city officials, including the police department. Briggs ran the name through the internal system. Kevin Mallory had never been interviewed. She called it in immediately. Within 24 hours, officers brought Mallory in for questioning. He was calm, polite, even charming. He claimed he had nothing to do with the case. That he was home the night Madeline disappeared. That his wife and young son could vouch for him. But when asked to submit a voluntary DNA sample, he hesitated. Briggs noted the pause. Eventually, he agreed. The results came back a week later. Partial match. 93% alignment with the DNA found on Madeline's body. It wasn't definitive, not yet. But it was the first match since the beginning of the investigation. Briggs ordered a search of Mallory's home. In the garage, an old gym bag filled with spare clothes, gloves, a utility knife, and most chillingly, a crumpled flyer with Madeline's face on it from one of the early search parties. When asked about it, Mallory claimed he picked it up at a gas station and meant to help but never got around to it. The explanation was weak. The DA approved a request for an arrest warrant. On March 1, 2009, nearly 3 years after Madeline Cho was killed, Kevin Mallory was officially detained for investigation. But that very evening, before charges could be filed, Mallory disappeared. His house was empty. His phone powered off. His passport missing. He had vanished. Later that month, it was discovered that Mallory had flown to Perth, Australia, using a second passport obtained under his mother's maiden name. He had successfully applied for permanent residency months before, the move clearly premeditated. It wasn't just escape. It was orchestration. And someone had helped him. Kevin Mallory didn't vanish because he panicked. He vanished because he planned to. The day after his voluntary DNA test, as the Rockford Police Department scrambled to piece together a formal charge, Mallory was already 3 steps ahead. While detectives reviewed preliminary results and the DA prepared paperwork, Mallory had packed a bag, withdrawn $12,000 in cash from multiple bank accounts under different names, and erased his digital footprint. By the time the arrest warrant was signed, he was gone. No phone activity. No GPS. No credit card use. When officers arrived at his house, the driveway was empty. The front door unlocked. Lights off. In the garage, one vehicle was missing, the black SUV with the broken mirror. His wife, Caroline, told police she hadn't seen him since early that morning. He said he was going to the dealership, she said, confused, eyes red-rimmed. He kissed our son on the forehead. I thought he was just going to work. But Kevin Mallory didn't go to work. Security footage at St. Louis Lambert International Airport showed him at 6:42 a.m., wearing a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, rolling a single suitcase behind him. He checked in for a flight to Vancouver under a different name, Jordan Reed Malloy, a legal alias created using his mother's maiden name. He carried a legitimate passport, issued 9 months prior. Once in Vancouver, he boarded a connecting flight to Perth, Australia, a city few in Missouri had even heard of. But Kevin knew it well. His father had business contacts there, and Kevin had spent a summer abroad in Perth during college. He had roots there. And a plan. By the time the U.S. authorities confirmed his departure, Mallory had already landed and submitted paperwork for permanent residency. He had listed a job offer from a friend of his father's in a car import business. He rented a small apartment under a corporate lease. Set up a local bank account. Changed his phone number. Kept a low profile. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he might have gotten away with it if the Cho family had stayed quiet. But they didn't. In fact, they got louder. Madeline's brother Daniel launched a national campaign. They partnered with victims' rights organizations, gave interviews to media outlets, even appeared on Dateline. The words, Kevin Mallory, became associated with one phrase only. The man who ran. The pressure mounted. By the summer of 2010, the U.S. had officially issued an international arrest warrant. Mallory was added to Interpol's Red Notice list, flagged at all international borders. But extradition from Australia wouldn't be easy. The Australian government required a formal request, extensive documentation, and proof that the suspect would receive a fair trial. Behind the scenes, U.S. authorities worked tirelessly to meet every requirement. Meanwhile, Mallory lived quietly in the suburbs of Perth. He drove a gray Toyota Camry, attended church, told his neighbors he had moved for a fresh start. He even volunteered at a local youth sports program. The irony almost too much to believe. Then, in late 2011, the first break came. An anonymous tip from a local woman who recognized his face from a YouTube documentary on the case, notified Australian police. She claimed he had been using a different name but matched the photos and mannerisms precisely. The Australian authorities cross-checked the passport, rental contracts, and fingerprints. It was him. Kevin Mallory had been hiding in plain sight for 2.5 years. On January 17, 2012, Kevin Mallory boarded a return flight to the U.S., unknowingly walking into a trap. He believed he had cleared a legal hurdle and was visiting for family business. But when his plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, U.S. Marshals and FBI agents were waiting. He was arrested on the spot, calm, composed, saying only, "Am I being extradited or arrested?" The answer was both. Mallory was flown back to Missouri under high security. The moment his feet touched Rockford soil again, he was officially charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and aggravated sexual assault. The Cho family was notified in the middle of the night. Lily cried. Daniel sat in silence. Mrs. Cho fell to her knees and whispered, "She can rest now." On February 2, 2012, Kevin Mallory was arraigned at the Rockford County Courthouse. Press filled the hallways. Protesters stood outside holding signs. Justice for Madeline. No deals. No delays. He pleaded not guilty. His attorney requested bail. The judge refused. The defendant has already demonstrated an intent to flee, she said. He will remain in custody until trial. For the first time in 6 years, it felt like the wheels of justice were turning. But the battle wasn't over. Because Mallory had money, influence, and a team of high-powered attorneys behind him. And while the Cho family hoped the worst was behind them, the courtroom would become the new battlefield. The next phase of the fight for Madeline's justice was about to begin. By the time Kevin Mallory was brought back to Rockford in early 2012, the town had changed, and so had the stakes. What had once been whispers behind closed doors had now become a nationwide conversation. The Cho family's relentless pursuit of truth had made headlines far beyond Missouri. And now, all eyes were watching. The courtroom was packed on February 2, 2012, the day of Mallory's first pretrial hearing. Local news vans lined the street. Inside, the Cho family sat in the front row, Lily on one side of her mother, Daniel on the other. And there he was. Kevin Mallory. In a gray suit, clean-shaven, hands clasped, he looked more like an executive than a murder suspect. There was no visible guilt in his demeanor, just composure. As if this were some misunderstanding he had the misfortune of being tangled in. When the judge asked how he pleaded, he answered firmly, "Not guilty." The room held its breath. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Carla Mendez, wasted no time laying the groundwork. "We have DNA," she said. "We have a witness placing a vehicle matching the suspects at the scene. We have a history of flight, false identity, and coordinated evasion. The defense will argue coincidence. We argue premeditation." But the defense team, funded, many assumed, by the Mallory family fortune, pushed back hard. Lead attorney Graham Ellis, known for getting high-profile clients acquitted, called the prosecution's evidence circumstantial and incomplete. He argued that partial DNA meant nothing without confirmation. He pointed to lack of eyewitnesses, lack of a murder weapon, and a timeline that, he claimed, couldn't be proven beyond doubt. But what shocked the public wasn't the legal maneuvering. It was Mallory's version of events. In June 2013, during the trial's first major testimony session, Kevin Mallory took the stand. He didn't deny being with Madeline Cho. In fact, he claimed they had met before, under circumstances that made the courtroom fall silent. He testified, under oath, that on the afternoon of April 21, 2006, he had contacted an associate who arranged a meeting with a young woman for consensual sex. "She approached me near the golf course," he said. "I paid her $300. She got in the back seat. It was all voluntary. She left the vehicle alive." The room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Cho buried her face in her hands. Lily stared straight ahead, stone-faced. The implication was clear. Mallory was attempting to reframe Madeline, a kind, disciplined, Taekwondo black belt who tutored underprivileged kids, as a prostitute. It was beyond defamation. It was desecration. The prosecution was visibly furious. They countered swiftly. They called in forensic experts who testified that the trauma on Madeline's body, bruises, lacerations, and defensive wounds, were inconsistent with any consensual act. They confirmed that the injuries occurred within a narrow window, likely less than 12 hours before her death. They pointed to the DNA match. 4 independent samples confirmed to be at least 99.9% consistent with Mallory's genetic profile. They brought in Lily Cho, who, through tears but with astonishing clarity, recounted the run, the missing shoe, the SUV. She identified the make, model, and damage. "It was his car," she said. "I saw it. I'll never forget it." The defense tried to poke holes in every witness. They accused forensic teams of procedural errors. They accused the CHAS of emotional distortion. They claimed the investigation had been tainted by public opinion, by media coverage, by politics. But at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Kevin Mallory had fled the country the moment investigators began circling. He had used a fake name, secured Australian residency, and lived abroad for years under a false identity. If he was innocent, the ADA argued, why run? The trial stretched over months. At times, it seemed justice might slip away. Wealth and lawyers have a way of bending facts into doubt. And doubt, in the American system, means freedom. But the Cho family refused to blink. On August 9, 2015, the final verdict was read. The courtroom was silent. The judge, a woman known for her precision and restraint, cleared her throat. "We find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated sexual assault, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution." Kevin Mallory showed no emotion. Not when the sentence was read, death. Not when the courtroom gasped. Not even when Mrs. Cho broke down, whispering, "Thank you," to no one in particular, maybe to the judge, maybe to God, maybe to Madeline. The reporters rushed outside. Headlines ran across the country. Fugitive Mallory sentenced to death in Cho murder trial. Justice after 9 years. The girl who wouldn't be forgotten. But it wasn't over. Because Kevin Mallory was not done fighting. He would file appeals. First to the state. Then to the federal courts. Then, when the law changed, he would seek a reduction of sentence. But for that moment, that one moment, justice had spoken. Madeline Cho's name had been dragged through the mud. Her memory stained by lies. Her future stolen. But her dignity, that couldn't be taken. Not by a lie. Not by a lawyer. Not even by death. Justice is rarely simple. And even when delivered, it never feels complete. After the courtroom emptied that August afternoon in 2015, and the cameras were packed away, and the reporters moved on to the next story, the Cho family remained. Still, quiet. Hollowed out by years of grief, and by the quiet, complicated weight of finally hearing the word, guilty. But justice, even when achieved, does not bring her back. Madeline Cho, daughter, sister, friend, dreamer, was still gone. In the months that followed the sentencing, Kevin Mallory remained in a maximum security facility, appealing his sentence through every channel he could. His defense attorneys cited everything: judicial bias, flawed forensics, media influence, unreasonable emotional pressure. They filed motions. They demanded retrials. They pushed constitutional technicalities. But at every level, state, then federal, his appeals were denied. In 2016, the Missouri Court of Appeals unanimously upheld the verdict. The judges stated plainly, the evidence was not just compelling. It was overwhelming. Still, Kevin Mallory kept trying. By 2018, he had run out of standard appeals. But something else had begun to shift in the background: the law itself. That year, the Missouri legislature passed a bill to review mandatory death sentences across the state. The movement had been growing: public pressure, international criticism, and a national reckoning with capital punishment. The law didn't abolish the death penalty altogether, but it granted judges discretion in sentencing, allowing resentencing in certain cases. Mallory's legal team pounced on the change. In early 2023, they filed a motion for sentence review, arguing that he had expressed remorse, had participated in rehabilitation programs, and, perhaps most gallingly, that the original sentence had been influenced by public outrage, not pure legal principle. To the Cho family, it felt like a reopening of a wound that had barely begun to scar. Lily Cho, now in her mid-30s, working as a trauma counselor, flew in from Seattle. Daniel came from California with his newborn son. Madeline's would have been nephew. Mrs. Cho, thinner, slower, quieter than before, sat between them in the courtroom, her fingers trembling slightly as she held a worn photograph of her daughter. The hearing took place on May 29, 2024. Kevin Mallory, now 40, stood in the defendant's box, the same box he had stood in nearly a decade earlier. He wore a plain beige jumpsuit. His hair had thinned, his posture slightly stooped. But the voice was the same. Calculated. Practiced. Through his attorney, he claimed genuine regret. He said he had found faith in prison, that he had witnessed the consequences of his actions and wanted a chance to live even behind bars. He did not speak directly to the Cho family. He did not apologize. Instead, he positioned himself as a man who had paid a price and now sought mercy. The prosecution, however, had come prepared. ADA Carla Mendez, now lead district attorney, took the floor one last time. This was not just murder, she said. This was a calculated, vicious, inhuman act committed against a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and followed by an elaborate escape, lies, and efforts to evade justice for nearly a decade. She presented photographs, the crime scene, the coroner's report, Madeline's bruised and battered body. She held up a copy of Mallory's boarding pass to Perth, the fake passport, the deleted emails. This man did not turn himself in. He was caught. He did not show remorse. He reinvented the victim as a criminal to save himself. That is not remorse. That is performance. She paused. Then she turned to the judge. And let us not forget the family. The Cho family has endured 18 years of pain, media scrutiny, and re-traumatization. They've waited for justice. They've carried the weight of every delay, every loophole. Today they deserve peace. The judge deliberated for over an hour. When she returned, she spoke quietly but firmly. I find that the circumstances of this case, the brutality of the crime, the premeditated flight, the manipulative defense, do not support a reduction of sentence. The court maintains the sentence of death by lethal injection. Kevin Mallory showed no emotion. The Cho family wept, not with triumph, but with finality. A long, exhausted grief that had nowhere else to go. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited for a statement. Lily Cho stepped forward. My sister was not a prostitute. She was not a mistake. She was not a side note in someone else's life, she said, voice steady. She was Madeline. She deserved more. And now, finally, we can let her go. Mrs. Cho said nothing. She simply pressed her hand to her heart and whispered, You can rest now. In the months that followed, the family established the Madeline Cho Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting victims of violent crime and offering self-defense programs for young women. They built the first community center in Rockford bearing Madeline's name, the dream she never got to realize herself. And every April on the anniversary of her death, they gathered at Fairgrove Park, where it all began. They placed flowers. They lit candles. They remembered not how she died, but how she lived. How she ran faster than everyone else. How she made everyone feel seen. How she never gave up. And how, even in the face of darkness, she led them forward.